Okay, so we are going to continue on thinking about measuring public opinion through surveys, and we're starting with the margin of error. So another key concept when we're talking about using surveys is understanding that the survey is only accurate to a certain degree. The margin of error reflects the accuracy of the survey, and that depends on the sample size. So the sample size has to be representative of the universe, and when it is, the margin of error is usually plus or minus 3 to 4%. That's the average. So when you have a larger sample size that pulls from that universe that we were talking about, your margin of error shrinks. An acceptable margin of error is either 3% higher than the percentages that you're given, or 3 to 4% lower, but nothing more than that. So that's what margin of error is, the accuracy of the survey. And it depends on the size of our sample. Some other important factors about surveys, some things to keep in mind. So the wording, first thing, how the questions are worded, question wording. That's very important because if the questions are leading, that can influence a person's answers. However, if the questions are clear, then you have a more accurate survey measuring opinions. Another important factor is the sequence of questions. What is the order that we're asking the questions in? So these are important things to consider. A third factor is this occurrence of phantom opinions. So we have to be careful what phantom opinions are those opinions that people give because they don't want to let the researcher know that they're not really knowledgeable about the issue. So phantom opinions, they are given, the individual can kind of speak to or fill in the survey and kind of make up opinions, but they really don't know much about the issue. And since they don't want to say they don't know, they kind of just mark whatever they think they should mark. So phantom opinions is the third. The fourth important factor is the interviewer-respondent interaction. So anytime a survey is given, there's a researcher or a person giving the survey. That's the researcher or the interviewer. The person who's taking the survey is the respondent. There's always an interaction between these two people, even when the survey is given over the phone. So sometimes this interaction can be influenced by, say, if the interviewer and the respondent are two different genders, or if they're the same gender, that can cause a difference in the respondent and how they answer. The race or ethnicity of the interviewee, that can make a difference. Also, if there's a noticeable generation gap between the interviewer and the interviewee. So that's just another factor to keep in mind. The interviewer-respondent interaction is what that's called. And then fifth is the timing of the survey. So polls are only a snapshot at the moment, but they don't always capture kind of long-term trends. So we have to keep in mind, even when we do read about survey results or polling, we have to keep in mind that this question was asked at a particular point in time when particular things were going on in the world. So you can't necessarily assume that people would say the same thing even a month or 2 months, and definitely not 6 months down the line. So the timing of the survey is also important. Benefits of the surveys. One important benefit is that they are generalizable, and that is a term that you'll hear used often with regards to surveys, because if we scroll back up, if we have a representative sample and a random sample, then the idea is the reason the margin of error is smaller is because we can more accurately assume that the opinions or the findings that we come up with from the survey, we can generalize them to that larger universe. We can say, based on what we did talking to this small group, we can generalize the same opinions are relevant to the larger group. So generalizability is very important, and that means we can make some assumptions about whether the findings reflect the views of the entire universe that was studied. So generalizability is one benefit. Second is cost effectiveness. Surveys are relatively easy and cheap to administer. They do not cost nearly as much as focus groups, which we'll get to in a second. So they're relatively cost effective. And the third benefit is that they can be extensive. It's possible to reach a large population, even a large sample through a survey, especially if you do one over the phone, or even if you do one by mail, and if you can give people incentives to respond. So they can be extensive, which means you can have a large number of people who replied to your survey, large numbers. Now, a few problems with surveys. So one important problem is that we often do get unrepresentative samples. So remember, if we have the entire universe, which is the population that we want to talk about, and then we have to pull a sample, many times that sample does not reflect the larger universe. It doesn't necessarily reflect the same age of the universe, the same income status, the same makeup of race and ethnicity or gender. And so, because many times the surveys are not representative, that can be a problem because they might be talked about as though these are the opinions of everyone, when in reality the sample would show they're not the opinions of everyone at all. Second problem is that nowadays, especially because phones are used so often for surveys, that means many people opt out. So many people refuse to answer the phone and they refuse to participate, so they are not represented. So it kind of speaks to the first problem, the lack of representation. The fact that phones are being used, it gives people even more of an opportunity to opt out. So their ideas are not being collected for this public opinion data. And a subpoint of that is that cell phones, because so many people only have cell phones, some surveys now are kind of catching up with that trend and including cell phone numbers in the phone survey, but many still don't. They only call landlines. So think about how many people you know who only have a cell phone. Those people would be left out of the survey. So again, they would not be represented. Their voices wouldn't be heard. And then point number 3, another problem is that surveys are often inaccurate due to what we talked about before, the lack of representation, also due to lack of response rate, and because people who choose to respond to surveys, they're demographically different from those who do. There's something different about them. They usually have more of an interest in the issue to begin with, and so that's kind of a problem because you end up collecting the opinions of people who are a certain kind of person who might be following the issue or might be more willing to express their opinions. So those are just some issues to keep in mind. So I have here a suggested activity that's listed for you. I have 2 very reputable political polling websites, Pew Research Center and Gallup Polls. And I suggest that you just take a look around both of these websites so that you can get a sense of, try to identify some of those key issues that I mentioned before. What are some of the issues being studied? Who was the sample? And if you look down at the methodology, what is the standard of error, the margin of error? Is it plus or minus 3 to 4%, or is it higher or lower? Are they primarily using phones? And if so, are they including cell phones? Things like that. So this is an opportunity for you to kind of apply some of the concepts that we just talked about. Now moving on to focus groups. Another way of measuring public opinion is through a focus group. Now what a focus group is a small but demographically diverse group of people who are brought together to engage in a conversation. Now the conversation has to be facilitated and it's focused on either a political candidate or a political issue. So this small, demographically diverse group, rather than giving them a survey and asking them to answer questions that the researcher has already come up with, this group is brought together and led in a conversation. That way the individuals have a chance to make up their own, bring up the topics that they care about. They also have a chance to listen to and respond to one another as opposed to just interacting with the survey. So an important factor about focus groups is that people are asked to talk about their perceptions, their opinions, beliefs, and attitudes, but this is an open-ended conversation. So they are allowed to kind of speak their mind and acknowledge their feelings about the issue. Now, point C, the focus group is characterized by an interactive setting. So again, the participants are free to talk to each other, but also listen to each other. So that means if you're worried about the participants influencing one another, the focus group is not for you, because the participants will be able to listen to how other people respond, and many times their answers will start to kind of build on one another because they're engaging in a conversation. And then point D, the researcher, when they're leading the focus group, they take notes or they record the focus group so they can track some of the important trends that come up. So rather than having all that data that's already in the survey, the researcher has to track or record the focus group so that they can kind of identify like what do they want to analyze later. Now, some of the benefits of a focus group. You get more insight into the attitudes of the people because you're letting them explain themselves as opposed to trying to measure them. You're trying to get insight and understanding of them. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit is that participants are allowed to choose what descriptive categories they use or they want to use to talk about an issue. They choose their own language. They choose to frame the issue in the way that they understand rather than trying to read a survey question and figure out what they think about the question and how they can respond to the question. The participants are allowed to choose. And then the third key point is that the focus group lets the participants go in depth about their political attitudes and priorities. They're not limited to a survey. They can kind of talk and be free with their conversation. Now, some problems with focus groups. One problem, they're difficult to make generalizable conclusions. So if you go back to our talk about generalizability, a focus group is difficult to generalize to the larger population because even though you try to get demographic representation, you can't assume that just because one woman of a certain age has thoughts about a political issue, you can't assume that all women will feel that way. So that's a problem. A second problem is that they are time intensive and labor intensive to organize. It takes more time to work around people's schedules and bring them together, have a facilitator, actually take an hour or two, sometimes 3, to have the conversation and then analyze the conversation later. And then third is that it's easy for the conversations to get off track if they're not properly facilitated. So that's the third key problem. Now, I also have a clip here of a focus group from Face the Nation. So this just gives you an insider view on what a focus group is like. So I encourage you to watch that clip and then again, try and identify some of the positives and the negatives that we've covered in the videos. Now, as far as upcoming, what you need to be aware of or keep on your radar, for next week, we'll be talking about political participation. So we'll link this week's understanding of public opinion and the process of how people develop those opinions with our study of political participation next week. Also keep in mind that on October 7th, your Take Action assignment, Chapter 6, is due, focused on public opinion, family politics. So make sure you review Appendix 2 in the syllabus and follow the instructions closely. Don't just read your textbook because the instructions in your syllabus are those that you need to follow. And remember, Take Action number 2 will be due on Sunday, October 7th. So thank you. I hope this video is helpful. I will post it on Canvas right now, and I will send out an email letting you all know that it's available. Have a great week.